Every Sony camera is kind of in need of an update. We're at that point in the product life cycle of the FX3, the A7 IV, to name a couple. But there's one camera that stands out as being kind of Sony's most underrated camera, in my opinion. And that's the Sony A7R5. It's been out for about 2 years now, and in this video I want to talk about what makes this such an underrated camera, what could potentially be improved, how I've used this the past couple of years. Not really specs, more like actual real world how this handles. Now, as well as being the most underrated camera, it is the least most talked about camera on YouTube compared to all the other cameras that are out there. And that's because it falls right into the middle. It's not Sony's lowest entry to the full frame world like the A7 III was, like the A7 IV is now technically. It's not their best like the A9 series, the A1. It falls right into the middle of those two. And seeing someone with this camera out in the wild compared to all the other options out there is actually quite rare. It stands in a weird spot with the Sony A7CR, makes it even less appealing to most people. But for the little bit more money that this costs, it offers way more value, and we've talked about that before in this video up here. So consider this an extremely slept on camera. Now yes, it doesn't have global shutter, or it doesn't have the fastest burst rate, so you can't really compare it to like the A9 III or the A1. Those are Sony's flagship models. But if you are looking for a more budget-friendly version of those cameras, this is absolutely that. But what about the A7R5 makes this slept on and seriously underrated in Sony's lineup? 61 megapixel sensor with 15 stops of dynamic range, which for photos gives you flexible options. You can shoot in 60 megapixels, you can shoot in 26 megapixels, or in 15. If you pop it into crop mode, you still have 26 and 15 megapixel options with 1.5 times more reach with whatever lens you're using. And there's a lot of people and a lot of specs really on paper that suggest that the sensor that is in this is the same sensor that is in the A7R5. This is the Leica Q343, if you weren't aware what this was. And it makes sense because when you look at all the crops that you can do with this, the video features that this has, it does kind of make sense. There's nothing official out there that says that, but when you put two and two together, it's logical. Now when it comes to video, you get all the file formats that you're used to with Sony, all the codecs that you need to use. People forget that this shoots 8K. It shoots 8K 10-bit 420, 4K 10-bit 422 with a 1.24 crop on both those. And shooting 4K 24 with this is actually an oversampled 6.2K image. I often shoot with the A7R5 and the FX3 video side by side, and there's something about the image that comes out of this that just looks much richer, a little bit less digital. Straight out the camera, I genuinely prefer the way the image looks out of the A7R5 when it comes to video. As soon as you've applied LUTs and things like that, like you can get it looks pretty much the same, but straight out the camera, there's something pretty special about the way the video looks out of this. Now that's just high-level photo and video specs. Actual camera features, it literally has everything you could possibly need. Now there's too many features here to even remember, so I'm gonna go off of my notes here. 10 frames per second RAW shooting, focus stacking, a higher res screen than most of Sony's other cameras, a fully articulating screen, breathing compensations, focus breathing compensation, focus mapping, shockless white balance, full-size HDMI, the best stabilization of any Sony camera that's out there. We'll talk more about that in a bit. Autofocus assist, tons of customizable buttons. There's a joystick on the back of the camera, separate settings for both photo and video. You can change that with the dial on the top there, which is super handy. You also have pixel shift, where you can take a bunch of images of one image and combine it all to make this big 200 megapixel plus size image. And that accounts for all the trees moving and wind blowing and all that kind of thing as well. This came out at a time when a lot of those were new features to Sony. They were being trickled out across bodies that were released prior to this. Some got them, some didn't. People were getting annoyed because their body was only a year old and it didn't have some of these newer features because Sony kept bringing out new features. And then Sony dropped this and just said, here, have all of the features that we've kind of been producing for the last couple of years, have it all in one camera. A true photo video hybrid camera. Minus 120 frames per second video, which this doesn't have, which the FX3 does have. I know there's going to be people that say that in the comments down below. This came out at the tail end of 2022, and since then we've had the A9 III with global shutter, but otherwise we haven't had a huge amount of new features. So this still packs a punch today in November 2024. And at the time of making this video, you can get one of these used on B&H for $3,200. Or $3,500 if you want to buy it new. It is also on sale right now, like $400 off because of the holidays. But if you go on the used market on Facebook Marketplace, you can get these for even cheaper. That is an incredible amount of value compared to some of the options that are out there for the price that you pay for this. Quick interruption, come here for a second. Have you ever heard of an art board? What it'll do is bring a bunch of assets into one place, kind of create a mood board for you and a way to generate some inspiration for your project. So this is a feature that Artlist just added. They are the sponsor of today's video. I'm gonna demo to you just really fast how you can use this to help your pre-production process. Let's say we need some inspiration for the intro to a documentary that we're producing in a style that like Netflix would make. So on the left-hand side now, you'll see the section that says Create Artboard. Netflix style documentary intro with lots of aerial footage. Hit Get Suggestions. So right here, what you'll see it's done is it's given us some suggested assets for music, stock footage, sound effects, or you can just view everything kind of nicely on one page there. So let's just try some music that it generated. I think for the purpose of this demo, that'll work great. So what you can do is click on Add. From here, we want to pick a couple of clips that go with our intro. This looks pretty good. Maybe this one as well. So what you can actually do is play the song and hover over the video and see how that music works in relation to the video and if it's going to work for you. So it's a super easy way to test out with some stock footage, which you can use in your film if you wanted to as well. It's included as part of the license, but to see if that works with the music that you've selected. And you're able to send that artboard to whoever you want, and they're able to play back all those assets and view everything without needing an Artlist account. Now, as of November 19th, Artlist has their holiday sale going on. It's the only time of the year that they actually discount their max plan. If you use the link down below, click on that, you'll get 2 months free and 10% off your Artlist max plan. Now at this point, I know there's a lot of people waiting or have already commented down below to say, well, it has terrible rolling shutter for video. That is the biggest complaint that people tend to have with this camera, and it is worse in 8K and in the cropped 4K mode, so that's something to be aware of. But the thing is, it's still really not as bad as everyone is making it out to be. Everyone loves to jump on the negative train with specs when things get released, and the rolling shutter is really the lowest hanging fruit with the A7R5. But the reality is there is a lot of cameras that suffer from rolling shutter, and most people aren't noticing it unless you're really looking for it. If you're using this camera to make client work, they really aren't going to be seeing that rolling shutter that you're all obsessed with. And this guy right here is Rich. You've probably seen him before. He's the best behind the scenes shooter out there, bar none. There's no one else. He shoots a lot of Kofi's videos for him and helps Kofi with a lot of his work. He shoots a lot of Lee's videos, and he's helped me out as well before too. He's also an incredible astrophotographer, so go give him some love too. But do you know what camera he uses for all of his behind the scenes content, for all of the content that he shoots for everybody else? This camera right here, the Sony A7R5. Have you seen any comments or concerns from people on Kofi's videos mostly, some of Lee's, complaining about how the video has rolling shutter? No. That is my point. That is the difference of people actually using this camera compared to looking at a spec sheet and formulating an opinion. Specs are one thing, real world usage is another thing. We need to not forget that. Now, I won't discount the fact that yes, it does have rolling shutter and just pretend it doesn't exist, because it does, but it's not nearly as bad as people are saying. The other thing you can look at though is the fact that you don't actually have to use it for video that you're going to be moving the camera around a lot or panning a lot, where you would see rolling shutter more than if you were just holding it stationary, because this camera has the best stabilization of any camera out there that Sony has. 8-stop 5-axis stabilization. I've talked about this many times in videos the past couple of years. This thing is like a tripod when you have it turned on, the active stabilization turned on, that is. Now, I don't shoot as many weddings as I used to, but when I got my hands on this camera and paired it with the FX3, this became my preferred way of shooting throughout the day. Yes, I still had the FX3 with the 24-70 or the 35-150 on a gimbal, but handheld just allows you to get much more candid moments. You're much less inconspicuous. You're much less conspicuous when you have this setup compared to a big gimbal with a big long camera lens on there. It just allows you to get much more natural moments of the day. So I'd have a 50mm f1.2 on here with one of the Sony mics on the top there. I'd stash this on my hip when I'm not using it because it's not a huge setup. It's way more discreet, and you can throw the 135 f1.8 on this, and I'll overlay video here for you to see, and it's still very, very stable. So I ended up using this a lot for my reactions, the reaction shots for the toasts during the speeches. No tripod, no monopod making me obvious. It's just a really great way to shoot those kinds of things. And all that video as well is 10-bit S-Log3, has S-Cinetone if you want to shoot in that. Now, the glaring thing missing from this camera is being able to load your own LUTs in it. Yes, it has gamma display assist, which I actually mapped to the C3 button there to be able to turn it on and off. You can set it to auto as well, but when you set it to auto and you go into photos, it's still there, which is kind of strange, so I have it mapped to the C3 button there. But that just shows you essentially the Rec 709 conversion. You can't physically load your own LUTs like you can with the FX3. So that is one big video feature that is missing from this. You also don't have the ability to use anamorphic lenses on this. You can use them, you just can't preview them on the screen here how it's going to look because there's no de-squeeze option. Base ISOs are 800 and 2500, but I've pushed this much higher. I very much stand by that. I'd rather get the shot with a little bit of noise compared to not get the shot, because I technically can't make that shot perfect. I've shot with this at 5000, 6400, even higher, and it's really completely usable without having to apply any extra noise reduction on there. Remember, those base ISOs are like the cleanest. We've been for many years going up into other ISO ranges, so there's no reason why you can't do the same with this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. If you want to have more of a perfect image, you can still apply noise reduction, but it is very usable at those ISOs as well. This was Sony's first foray into the AI world of things and the subject tracking, being able to kind of figure out where a subject is if they go behind an object and figure out the depth and where the autofocus point should be. It has the same AI chip as the newer A7C II and the A7CR has, but it does lack the auto reframing and those features as well, which are actually pretty handy. They very much serve a time and a place when it comes to shooting vertical video for making sure that you're in the center of the frame. It means you don't have to worry about reframing after the fact. And I also love that you can mimic the look of handheld video as well if you really crank the settings up there. If you need to have that handheld kind of shaky office look, you can do so by just leaving the camera on a tripod. You don't get that in this camera, and it doesn't really make sense because it's the same AI chip. We really haven't had enough software updates with the A7R5, and that is one thing I'd love to see introduced into this camera. There was an update that came out for this last month, the first one we've had in a long time. This is September 2024, in case you're watching this video sometime in the future. But I kind of thought we'd have more than what we got, but all we ended up with was better access and connection to the Creators app and the ability to use the Monitor and Control app wirelessly. Not really any physical features to the camera and its performance itself. I do have a feeling that we may not get any of those features, any additional features. With middle of the road cameras like this is, they tend to get forgotten about with those kinds of things. The A1, A9 series will be given priority because they're the flagship cameras, even though they take a long time to get updates as well, as will the A7 IV, FX3. Those are going to get given priority treatment because more people have them compared to this. The EVF has a beautiful 9.44 million dot screen inside of the EVF there for your eyes to view. It's the same one that was in the A7S III, and it is the standard for which every EVF should take note. It's way better than anything else out there that I've used. But I will say that occasionally I find the EVF doesn't match the colors on the screen. There was a couple of times I was shooting that it was so obvious that after I actually ended up sending this in for repair to see if there was a problem with the panel inside the EVF there, but it came back as within normal parameters. Now, when I was traveling earlier in the year with Dunner, we were shooting something at sunset, and he actually said exactly the same thing, and I've never heard anyone else say it before, and we had a conversation about it, and we've kind of narrowed it down to the fact that it seems to occur when you're in very warm situations, like color warm, not actual physically warm. So like sunsets, sunrises. And we're wondering if there's a color limitation with the EVF's panel inside there. So yes, it's super crystal clear at 9.44 million dots, but maybe it's not able to show very many colors. And maybe that's why sometimes the colors appear very warm, very reddish compared to the screen, which obviously has better color reproduction. That's just the opinion that we've kind of formulated there because Sony says it's otherwise fine. The screen that is on the back here is by far the best screen that Sony has ever put in any camera, both in terms of the clarity of this, because this is just over 2 million dots, so it's clearer than anything you really have that's out there. It's the clearest that Sony makes in terms of a camera, but also the fact that it is a fully articulating screen in every possible way. We're used to just having these flip screens on everything now, but this one has the fully, I think you call it a multi-angle or a vari-angle screen, where it gives you every possible option. That screen needs to be on every single camera. I will say though that if you ever shoot with like a Canon or a Fuji camera that has the same res dots that this has, you will notice a difference. This doesn't appear as nice. Canon screens are notoriously way better. They look much nicer. Your images just look so much better after you shoot them compared to when you look back at like the same image on this, which is kind of strange considering Sony makes fantastic TVs and has beautiful panels. So I really would like to see a much higher quality panel in here, not just higher res, higher quality. Now, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I got the A7C II when it first came out and had the A7 R5 here at the same time. Now, having both of those cameras at the same time really never felt like it made a lot of sense. So a couple of months ago, I decided to actually sell the A7C II. Now, the catalyst for that, because the C2 actually was my preferred camera of choice for the longest time, I'd find myself picking up that instead of this. What led me to actually end up wanting to sell it was traveling, and a couple of times I was shooting and really wanted a joystick on there. I've been playing around with using that for the focus point. Lee's got me into using that. There was a couple of situations where I really wasn't able to get the shot that I wanted because I needed to act quickly and I needed to use a joystick for the focus point. Touching the screen just didn't work as well. That for me was enough of a reason to say no, this is something I need. That combined with sometimes you really do need to have the EVF there, and the A7C II I was relying on the screen more than the EVF because the EVF wasn't that good. And it was another thing I noticed when traveling is like I needed to use the EVF for a specific couple of shots, and just it wasn't great. The experience of using that EVF is not good compared to this. It's a tiny little one. So that was just another reason, because the EVF is so much better on this. Combine that realistically with when you hold this in the hand, it does feel much better because it has that much bigger grip on there. Yes, I've gone back and forth talking about how smaller is better, but like ultimately I think now for a camera, when you're shooting stills, the grip does make sense to just be a little bit bigger there. There was one other thing kind of holding me in with the A7C II as well, and that was being able to shoot in the 235:1 aspect ratio, or being able to compose in that method to get those X-Pan style shots that I've been talking a lot about recently. You can reference this video up here. But when I got the GFX 50R, primarily just for shooting in that format, it really made me stop shooting with the A7C II like that. So it was another reason to just not hold on to it, and what ultimately accumulated into being the reason that I sold it. That's another one of those updates that I'm just not sure why we haven't been given inside here, because it makes sense that it should be there. Don't know why it's not. I would love to see it on here. So that is the Sony A7R5 2 years later. What I think, what I'd like to see, that's that. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Take care.